My Lords, I'm moving this motion with regret at the inadequate response of the government so far to restore our historic and precious blanket bog wetlands to their original native state and thereby improve conservation, as well as reaping the huge benefits that could have been brought to achieving our net zero climate change targets. As such, we contend that the SI should be reconsidered and strengthened on the grounds that it does not achieve its stated policy objectives. My Lords, I would like to thank the RSPB and Wildlife and Countryside Link for their helpful briefings on these issues. Our arguments have been strengthened by the report of the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee and now today by the report of the Joint Committee on Statutory Instruments, which has reported the SI as requiring elucidation as well as for defective drafting. My Lords, I would first like to say something about the broader issues raised by this SI. We have been blessed in the UK with having 13% of the world's blanket bog. It is hugely important to our ecosystem. It attracts important species such as golden plovers or sundew plants, as well as nurturing the development of sphagnum moss species. But as the explanatory memorandum points out, much of it has been degraded and is in poor state, with less than 12% in a near natural state. It is a threatened habitat, which is why the government, under the Conservation of Habitats and Species regulations, has a responsibility to protect this habitat type and return it to a favourable conservation status. In the UK, we are fortunate to have a particularly rich level of peat, which stores some 3.2 billion tonnes of carbon and can offset our carbon emissions to help us meet our climate change obligations. But sadly, this crucial natural resource is being eroded by habitat encroachment, by artificial drainage, by the excavation of peat for horticulture, and most damagingly by the burning of peatlands. This is primarily carried out to create better conditions for breeding grouse for the shooting industry. Regrettably, this has a reverse effect on its role as a carbon store, by releasing around 260,000 tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere each year. So, my Lords, it's now widely accepted that action to control peat burning is necessary. The Committee on Climate Change, in their report on land use in January last year, said, quote, "Burning heather promotes young shoots which grouse feed on, but it is highly damaging to the peat and to the range of environmental benefits that a well-functioning peat can deliver, e.g. water quality, biodiversity and carbon sequestration." And they went on to say, a voluntary cessation of this activity by landowners has not produced the desired outcome, so the practice should be banned across the UK with immediate effect, unquote. And the government themselves, in the 25-year Environment Plan, published back in January 2018, promised a new ambitious framework for peat restoration in England. They committed to publishing an England peat strategy later in 2018 to deliver it. So we might ask, where is that strategy? It's already nearly 4 years since the proposal first appeared in the 25-year Environment Plan. And, as we know, even a strategy is no guarantee of action. My Lords, this brings me to the specific wording of the SI. I'm grateful to the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee for drawing it to the attention of the House. In particular, they point out that much of the detail of how licences to burn will be granted will be set out in guidance, which gives the Secretary of State huge discretion in implementation before the start of the burning season on the 1st of October. They also point out that the Department should have been much clearer about the size of the areas of peatland that will be affected by the ban, which is hugely constrained in the SI. It only applies to upland peat in areas of sites of special scientific interest, special areas of conservation, or special protection areas. As Wildlife and Countryside Link have calculated, this only equates to about 109,000 hectares in England out of a total of 355 hectares. This is a maximum of 30% of the total upland peat. The scope of the ban is further limited by the series of exemptions which would allow burning to continue, for example, for conservation, enhancement or management of the natural environment, to reduce the risk of wildfire, or because the land is rocky or on a slope. My Lords, the end result of these exemptions is that in large swathes of upland blanket bog, burning will take place much as before. We will also miss a golden opportunity to expand the use of blanket bogs to mitigate flood risk and to improve water quality. My Lords, turning to the arguments around wildfires, I believe we're in danger of making the wrong link between cause and effect. Burning is only done to regrow the easily flammable heather vegetation. When you burn it, you get locked into an ever smaller cycle of the healthy heather growing back quicker and thicker. Ultimately, the most effective way to address the threat of wildfires is not to allow localised burning, but to return the landscape to a state less like moorland and more like actual bogs, full of muddy pools of water, which clearly don't catch fire. We should also acknowledge that most wildfires in the UK are not spontaneous, but caused by accidental thoughtlessness by the public, or indeed arson. And indeed, controlled burns in themselves can become out-of-control wildfires. Finally, my Lords, can I address the concerns about the need for greater scientific research into the management of the peatlands? Anyone reading the Committee on Climate Change report will see that their recommendations are absolutely predicated on the latest national and international science. Furthermore, the recent report from Natural England has once again reviewed the latest science. They concluded that burning on upland peatland had a largely negative impact on the flora, fauna, carbon and water. Then, in response to an oral question on the 14th of October, the Minister said that DEFRA have kept abreast of all of the scientific evidence and, quote, overall, the evidence shows that the burning of blanket bog is detrimental as it moves the bog away from its original wet state and risks vulnerable peat bogs being converted to drier heathland habitat, unquote. My Lords, we agree with this analysis, and I hope it gives noble Lords some comfort. So, in conclusion, I know the Minister cares about these issues. I hope he will indeed listen to our concerns about the limitations of this SI and accept the need to revisit it. I also hope he's able to address the specific concerns of the Secondary Legislation Scrutiny Committee and the Joint Committee of Statutory Instruments. If he is unable to give that reassurance that we seek, I give notice that I am minded to test the opinions of the House on this issue. I look forward to his response.